All right, so we've covered building rapport, eliciting their desires, uncovering their challenges, explaining coaching, and now is where you get to coach them on their decision to move forward with you. Now, depending on where your coaching fees are, how high they are compared to their economic situation, you might not need to do this at all. Maybe they've already signed up, piece of cake. But if you do need to coach them on the decision, then here's how to do that. So if your coaching fees are higher than where they feel like it's an easy yes, then that's where the coaching them on the decision comes from. This is where they might make some objections. And I'm just going to go through each objection and how to handle it. Now, the first objection that you might get is people might say, well, it costs too much. And quite frankly, I've rarely, almost never, in fact, I can't even remember anybody ever saying that it costs too much. But it could come up. This is a common objection for other things. Now, the reason it usually doesn't come up for coaching is because it's such a personal thing and that people wouldn't want to insult you by saying your coaching is too expensive. Instead, they might just say, well, I can't afford it, which we're going to get to next. But if they say it costs too much, then you could say, tell me more. Or you could say, well, compared to what? And then depending on what they say, then you can say, well, compared to, what you said earlier, this is where all the stuff that we did before comes in handy, because if we didn't uncover enough challenges, we didn't talk about the impact that those challenges are having and how it's costing them, then we might be in trouble here. But if we did a good job earlier, then it's like, well, compared to the cost of not achieving the results that you want, or compared to the cost of having all of these challenges, or the money that you missed out on, then really, if you were being accurate earlier when you mentioned that this could be, this probably cost you, $50,000 over the course of your life by not having this handled, or you might be losing anywhere between 3 and 15 years off your life, if you're a health coach of some sort or something like that, then, compared to that, most people would easily pay $15,000 to have an extra year to 15 years of extra lifetime. Now, you might be able to do this on your own, but since you haven't before, I highly recommend that you get this support. But on the other hand, they might be comparing you to something. They might say, well, I could just get a personal trainer or whatever, and then, you could talk about that. You want to be prepared for whatever the common things they might be comparing you to would be. Now, again, this is not very common, but for weight loss coaching, it could be. Now, here's the truth about personal trainers, is that most personal trainers don't really work to help you lose weight. They just exercise you. And if you do go in, you get exercised a couple times a month or a couple times a week, that's great. You'll burn some extra calories, might build some muscle, but that is not going to get you, you're not going to lose all the weight you want that way. The only way to lose the weight is to consume less calories and burn more calories. So you need to do both. Exercise, that's great. You're going to burn some more calories. You're going to get healthier, but you're not going to lose the weight that you want to lose. And so that's why. And why are you not? We talked about that. It's like, okay, it's these food cravings or these emotional eating. All that is the real culprit. And personal trainer is not going to be able to help you with that. So that's how you would want to handle this objection of that it costs too much. You want to find out what they're comparing, like compared to what. Or you might just say, tell me more, and they're going to kind of give you some more information. And again, we're not here trying to sell them coaching. We're not trying to sell them anything. We're trying to get them the results that they want, and we can help them produce those results if they get our coaching. And without our coaching, they're much less likely to get there. And if they get there at all, it's going to be slower and harder. Like I said, it's pretty rare that you're going to get people saying straight out it costs too much. What you'll hear more often is that I can't afford it. And so the same thing, you could say, well, tell me more. And then you can hear kind of what's going on. What's the thinking here? Well, I've got this much money, and I got, and then you can address that. You could say, well, here, what if we were to break this into, 18 payments for you, and make the monthly payments a little bit lower. Or, maybe there's something else that we could do, or something like that. Or how else could you get the money? I know coaches who have had their clients take out a second mortgage on their home to pay for the coaching. In some ways, people aren't being creative, or they're just afraid. Sometimes All of these things usually are just a cover for I'm scared. And so we're going to address that later on here. But right now, let's just go ahead and assume that maybe they can't afford it. Well, here's what I would recommend. Well, first of all, I would say, well, tell me more. Would you be able to afford it for the first month? Yes. The second month, third month. You might check in just to see how much can they afford. And if you sense that it's really a fear issue here, then you can move on to helping them overcome their fear, which again we're going to get to in a little bit. But right now, if you assume that maybe just really it is, you buy their story that it really is their budget, they just can't afford it. You could ask this question: well, what would work for you? And then just pause and let them come with a number. Well, maybe I could do $500 a month. $1,000 a month, I can't do 1,000, but maybe I could do $500 a month. And once you hear that, now you can either say, you know what? How about we do this? For the first 6 months, we can do it at 500. And then once we get you in a better place financially, somehow, again, if you're a business coach, that'll be easy, or a sales coach, that'll be easy. If you're a weight loss coach, I don't know how we're going to do that exactly yet, but maybe you can be creative and think of something. Once you know what they could afford, there's a lot of things you could do with this. You could meet them right where they are. You could see if they could meet you in the middle, like you're at 1,000, they're at 500. Say, clients pay me $1,000 a month for the fast action price. You're saying you could do 500 would be comfortable for you. What if we met somewhere in the middle? And let's say we did like $750 a month. How does that sound? Now they might say yes, they might say no. Either way, if they say no, you could say, if they say yes, say, great. Well, let me get you entered in the system, and you get them started as coaching, right? Get them started with you. If they say, I can't do 750, but and say, well, do you think you could come up a little bit? Maybe they can do 600. You could say that. Or you could just go with the 500 and say, well, why don't we go ahead and do it? To me, I think you'd make a great client. From time to time, I'll take on clients on a partial scholarship basis, and I'm happy to do that for you. The other thing is, if they're at 500 a month and you're at 1,000 a month, this is where you could offer a downsell, where you could say, well, I have another program that might be a better fit for your budget. It's called group coaching. Would you like to hear a little bit about that? I recommend that your group coaching prices are maybe half of what your one-on-one coaching is. That's just a rule of thumb. You don't have to take that as gospel, but so if you're charging $1,000 a month, then group coaching for $500 a month feels pretty reasonable, right? And again, if they can't afford the $500 a month, maybe they said they were at $300 a month, and your group coaching is $500. Maybe then they can come up to that, Or if they can't, maybe you could partial scholarship them into your group coaching. So there's a lot of options here to fit somebody's budget. Now, if you're sensing really that it's just fear that's going on here, then you could say, well, it sounds like if you say, well, they say they can't afford it, and you say, well, tell me more. They say, well, it's a big investment, and I get da-da-da-da-da. If it makes logical sense, like maybe you're only $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 for the year. When you compare that to the overall impact of, finding love once and for all. I know for me, when I was single for 4 years and dating a lot, and it was taking a lot of my energy. And I finally hired a coach to help me with my dating life. And 4 months later, I met my now wife. We've been together for 10 years. Once I got into that stable relationship, I just felt like it took away a lot of my distractions, and I was able to focus more on my business, and my business grew. So, you could relate anything into making more money. Maybe they can get a raise. Maybe you could coach them to ask for a raise. Maybe you could coach them to get promoted. There's all sorts of things we can do as a coach, even if we're not a career coach, that we can do to help impact them. Like, well, when was the last time you got a raise? How long has it been since you got a promotion? Is your car about to get paid off? How many more, there's ways that we can help them find money, and you can ask them those kinds of questions. But ultimately, if you're sensing that there's fear related to this, then you're going to want to address that. And then you could just say, well, it sounds like there's a party that wants to go for this, but maybe there's a party that's a little afraid to give it a try. Is that true? And if they say yes, then you could say, well, would you like me to coach you through the fear so you can get to a place of peace? And then you can just make a decision, yes or no, from your most centered and powerful place. How does that sound? And if they say yes, then you can coach them through that using the techniques I'll be sharing with you here in a little bit. So there's a lot that we can do here. We can coach them on the decision based on, intellectually, and we can also coach them on the decision emotionally. And we're going to get into coaching them on the emotional part of it in a moment. The next objection that people have is, I need to talk to my spouse. And that's a tricky one, right? Because, especially if you're married, then you kind of understand that one. And maybe you have the same agreements with your spouse, which could make this even tougher for you. But here's what we want to remember is that it's really important for them to get the coaching, and we want to do whatever we can in service of them getting the changes that we want. Forget about the money for us. I mean, that's certainly great, but we need to help them get the coaching because we need to help them change their life. So if you have somebody say, well, I need to talk to my spouse. This sounds great, but I need to talk to my spouse. Then there's some very specific things that you need to do. First thing you need to do is check in and say, well, if your spouse says yes, are you a yes? And then if they say yes, then that's great. But if they say, I'm not sure yet, then we want to talk them through that and find out what's going on. Maybe there's some more concerns that they have that we need to address. But if they say yes, then say, all right, well, what if your spouse says no? Then what are you going to do? And then they might say, well, you know what? They'll probably be okay with it. I can usually talk him into it or her into it or whatever. So that's great. Or if they might say, well, if my spouse is a no, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And that would be a problem, right? And say, well, I want to help you then be able to, do you want your spouse to say yes, or do you want your spouse to say no? If you want your spouse to say yes, then I'd love to give you some pointers on that. Would that be helpful to you? And if they say yes, then you could say, well, number one is you need to talk to them and explain, what your dream, tell them about your dream, tell them about your challenges, and tell them about how our coaching is going to address that and how important it is to you. All right? So that's what I would recommend you do. Now, before you go, there's one other thing that some people do is, we talked about the regular pricing and that there's special pricing right now for people who decide to go for it right on the spot. Now, I, of course, want you to talk to your spouse. What some people do is they get themselves registered so that they can hold the special pricing, and then they go talk to their spouse just to confirm that it's a yes, and if it's not, then they let me know and we just void out the whole transaction. Does that sound like something you'd like to do? And if they say yes, then say, great, well, let me get you entered in the system. You're going to want to enter all their information, their name, their phone number, their address, etc. Get their credit card info, but you don't necessarily process it yet. Now, you might tell them you're processing it now. Here's the tricky thing. Normally, I would just process it and just tell them, hey, just let me know in the next, if you can let me know today, then I can just void the transaction. It'll never even show up on your account. Worst case scenario, if you let me know by tomorrow, we can void, I can issue a refund, but it might show up on there and then come right off. All right, so you can do it that way, or you can just tell them it'll be charged right now and that you can void it, but not actually charge it. And the reason why is just because some people, depending on your coach, how much you charge for coaching and where you're at financially, credit cards, it's usually around 3% that is taken right off the top. And then if you do a refund, it's another 3%. So if somebody were to pay you, say, $10,000, you'd have to pay $300, and then to refund it's another $300. So that's like $600 that you're going to lose out on. So you might want to be careful about doing that. The other thing is, at that point, you're probably going to assume that it's pay plan, but just you could just check in. If your husband is yes, do you think you'd want to do the monthly payments, or do you think you'd want to do the full pay? And then if they say they want to do full pay, but they're still checking with their husband, say, well, we'll just do the first monthly pay, and then once your husband is 100% on board, then we'll just go ahead and charge the balance of the full amount. You won't pay. You'll pay if it's $10,000, we'll charge $997, and then we'll charge the balance of the $10,000 once your husband says is a yes. Now some people might say no. No, I can't do that. I need to talk to my husband. Then say okay. Remember that the regular investment is $1,500 a month, or $15,000 for the year. When are you planning on talking to your husband? Immediately? Great. And I look forward to hearing from you. Let me know what? Let me know by the end of the day? Great. Let me know by by tomorrow, whenever it is. Now, I personally don't keep following up with people. If they're on my email list, I'm by this point, they've got to be on my email list. I just let my regular email marketing be my follow-up system. So I don't like chase prospects.